Hi Hope Church, my name's Abby Beecham and I worship with the family at Hope Bromley Common. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Hebrews 11 verses 23 to 40. Although the final 18 verses in Hebrews provide us with quite the whistle-stop tour of Israel's Old Testament history, in these final verses we can find numerous reasons as to why we can have faith and confidence in both the goodness of God and in his provision for us as his children. In these verses, we initially read about the acts of faith within the life of Moses that spanned an amazing 80 years from his birth to the time he led the people out of Egypt. Around the time that Moses was born, the king of Egypt had grown fearful of the growing number of Jewish males. He ordered for them to be killed at birth, and parents of baby boys had two choices. They could kill their sons and save themselves, or they could try to save their sons and risk their own lives. In verses 24 to 29, we can read of the story of Moses, and this will likely feel really reminiscent for some of us of those early Sunday school lessons we might have had. But thinking about it now, this story has so much more depth for me, and the reality of those parents having to risk their own lives and the life of their beloved baby boy really challenges me to think about how strong their belief must have been in a God who would save them. His parents believed that God had set them apart and set their son apart for a great destiny, and this helped them to make a potentially life-changing decision. Interestingly, the Hebrew word for basket that is used in another account of this event in Exodus 2 is the very same word used to describe Noah's Ark in Genesis. They believed that God would save Moses, just as he had saved Noah. By faith, Moses was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a child with great destiny ahead, and they were not afraid of the king's demands. This act of courage against the king and that act of love towards their son came from faith. Hebrews 11 verse 1 gives us the answer. Faith is the assurance of the things hoped for. Faith in God's promises frees us from that fear of death and makes us brave in taking those risks of love. From verse 24, we see that as Moses grew up, by faith he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He didn't settle for a comfortable life. He refused to be called boring. He refused to follow the crowd. And he believed that living under God and seeking his reward in heaven would bring far greater riches than accessing the treasures available in Egypt. In verse 27, we read that by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, and choosing to follow the call of God on his life. The later verses in the passage help us to think about faith further. We learn through verses 29 to 35 that through our faith, God can and does work miracles and enables acts of providence to bring practical help and deliverance to his people. When I say miracles, I'm kind of thinking of those events that involve something pretty extraordinary and they change that kind of expected cause and effect cycle of life. The writer refers to miracles such as the dividing of the Red Sea and the tumbling down of the walls of Jericho. These are things that I think you might agree are pretty impressive, and they're really helpful examples of the miracles that were occurring. God altered the normal way that things work, and in an extraordinary way made them work differently. And in the cases given in Hebrews, the people of God were helped or rescued from danger or death. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down, and by faith, Rahab did not perish. By faith, they conquered kingdoms. How amazing is that to hear? Through our faith, God can also help us by acts of providence, where he can control and impact situations in a perhaps less extraordinary way, like in the life of Rahab. These things are often only noted when you kind of stop and look back and think, wow, God's provision really was at work there, and I didn't even notice. The final thought that I really wanted to share with you today is that sometimes God does not work miracles and acts of providence to deliver us from suffering. That would be the goal, to never have to go through it. But sometimes, by faith, God sustains us as his people through sufferings. In the final verses from 35 onwards, we're really reminded that having a true faith in God is not a magical guarantee for comfort and security and a problem-free life. I really believe that it's so important for us to understand that the miseries of God's people sustained in the verses 35 to 38 come by faith and not because of unbelief. God can and does do miracles and acts of providence to relieve his people and to deliver them, but not always. Having faith is not the determining factor in whether you suffer or escape. God is. The common feature of believers who escape suffering and of those who are called to endure is this: both of them involve believing that God himself is better than what life can give you now and better than what death can take from you later. When you can have it all, faith declares that God is better. And when you lose it all, faith knows that God is better. The great challenge of the book of Hebrews is not to keep this good news to ourselves. Let's pray that we can cultivate and spread the knowledge and confidence that God is better than what life can give us and what death can take away from us. I hope you found that helpful. Thanks so much for listening.